Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So good that you all came out. I'm already pleased. We have such a great group that have come out for our first night of Black History classes here at Second Baptist Church. We welcome all of you who are here. Of course, you know me, Pastor Todd Johnson. So glad that you came to share with us tonight. I'm so glad to see so many different ages here, and we have some more coming. I know my boys are on their way, or at least they better be. And to those of you joining us online, we're so glad that you're watching us from wherever you are. Everybody say, hey! Hey! I do that in church all the time, so nobody feels left out when they're watching from home. But we have an exciting night planned. I'm going to say a quick prayer, make two quick announcements, and announce our instructor for tonight. So let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father, we thank you and we bless you for this wonderful opportunity to be educated and enlightened and made aware of our history, our heritage, and the legacy that we have. We thank you that Black history is our history, it is our story, and that as we continue to learn and grow in the knowledge of where we come from, who has walked before us, that we will carry these stories forward. We thank you for our instructor tonight. We ask that you give her clarity of mind, that all would go well, that we would walk away better than we came. We thank you and praise you for all that you have done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. And amen. So if you're here in the house, we do have refreshments. We have some wonderful refreshments. London is over there ready to serve you. So feel free to go around this way if you would, around the back way if you would, not to distract from the instructor. If you're at home, you have to get your own snacks. Sorry about that. But I want to make two quick announcements before we open up, and that is there are two forums coming up for the primary election, which is vitally important. It's almost like a general election because there are so many offices, and some of them are contested and won't be contested in the general, and some are contested and will have a contest or an opponent in the general. And so A. Philip Randolph Institute and the League of Women Voters are hosting a forum and a candidates night at Warren G. Harding High School on Thursday, February 8th from 5 p.m. until 8 p.m. And that will be in the cafetorium. And you've seen some of the forums there. You'll be able to meet, greet, talk to the candidates there as well. So be sure to write that down. That is this Thursday, 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And for our online friends, please spread the word. If you're here, make sure you tell somebody so that they can be engaged. There will also be a candidates forum here at Second Baptist on February 20th. That's a Tuesday, February 20th. And that is hosted by Action and I Vote Black, and here in the church. Once again, multiple candidates for everything from our commissioners. We have judgeships up, and some other offices that we want to bring into our community and speak and answer particular questions that pertain to us. And so we got two great opportunities. Thursday from 5 to 8 at Warren G. Harding, Tuesday, February 20th at 6 p.m. There really is no excuse for us not to be informed with these opportunities. Amen? Amen. And we want to encourage our residents, our neighbors, our friends, our congregants to get out and vote and be a part of the political process in this primary election and not just wait until the general. Second, yes ma'am?
Did you say the one on the 20th, Pastor Todd, is at 6 o'clock? Did you
6
say
p.m. 6 p.m. here at 2nd. 6 p.m. here at 2nd. And on the 8th, which is this Thursday, it will be from 5 to 8 p.m. Will be the candidates night at Warren G. Harding. The second quick announcement, and this is for my brothers, I've only got a couple here and I know they'll already be there, but if you're watching online, we are having our second annual Citywide Brotherhood Summit hosted by Second Baptist Church at the Tri-Unity Building on Saturday the 17th from 10 to 1 p.m. We have great speakers and free hot breakfast planned. The entire event is free. We want to gather. We're looking for 150 men to come out, black men, to come and share together to see how they can get involved in the community, to get encouragement. We're talking about health and wellness. We're talking about community involvement and mentorship in our community. Last year, we had a little over 130 men come out to the first Brotherhood Summit, and we want to build on that effort. And so we're really grateful. Any man can come. Our young men are welcome to come, as well as our older gentlemen. And that will be Saturday, February 17th at the Tri-Unity Building, which is the old Mickey Army Navy store. We all remember Mickey Army Navy, from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m.
Now, because Mickey Army and Navy, I'm quite a bit older than you. not too much.
Right.
But, you know, first it was on Main Street, and then it was on, around the corner on Market Street. So
It's on Main.
On Main.
We're at the one on the corner of Main and right across from the family court.
Yeah, because my grandson's father is one of the presenters.
Okay, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yes, so we're really excited about that, and we want you to spread the word about that. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our presenter for tonight, giving us our very first week of African American history. Let's welcome Ms. Leah Dotson and give her a hand.
I'm so excited. There's so many people here because that means that this is not that you guys can talk and ask questions, and I can ask you questions. Because it can't be just me up here just feeding information. That is the worst type of education. It has to be a give and take, and it has to be something where you're getting something from it and you're able to express how you feel about what it is that you're hearing. So I'm so glad that so many people showed up. You could have been anywhere more, but you're here with us. I appreciate it. So we're gonna jump right in because it is impossible. The levels I went through to try to condense this because it's I keep trying to figure out how to, so I was just like, listen, condense it and we gonna roll. So, I wanna take it in waves though. So, we're gonna be doing this for all 4 Mondays. So I wanted to deal with, first and foremost, Africa, because we are African. I wanted to deal with Africa, then we're gonna move into slavery, but not the same slavery that we talked about. A lot of times in our history, we have an idea of who we are, and I think Pastor Todd even spoke to it about how we even got it in our heads where we disrespect our ancestors by thinking, they were meek or docile or just allowed themselves to be enslaved. There were so many slave revolts and so many insurrections and so much resistance to slavery in maroon communities that we have no idea about because nobody talked about it. So then we're going to move into that, and then we're going to move into Reconstruction because that's another part of history that we do not talk about, all the gains that we made during the Reconstruction era. And then we are going to talk about blacks in the Bible because a lot of times we see the Bible, but we don't see ourselves in it. So that is what we're going to talk about. Again, starting with today, African American history. And I started with a quote, right? If you believe your history begins with slavery, then the highest you can subconsciously strive to be is an amazing slave. So what does that mean? Somebody tell me what that quote, what do you hear when you hear that quote? I say it one more time. If you believe your history begins with slavery, then the highest you can subconsciously strive to be is an amazing slave. Fabian.
Maybe that means if you do your best, you get out.
If you do what, honey?
If you do your best, maybe you could get a contract so you'll be free.
Somewhat, yes. Yes. What else? Anybody else think? What do you think about when you... Yes, Miss Pat.
Oh, we've been led to believe that our history started in 1619.
Yes.
And in reality, we were always here, and it started in Africa when we're not enslaved.
Right. So it absolutely did not start in 1619. And if you think that your history began when you were enslaved, subconsciously you think of yourself as an enslaved person. So that's just subconsciously what you think of. So we're going to take it all the way back to the motherland. My quote that I live by: until lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So they credit this to Chinua Achebe, but it's not. It's just an African proverb. And what this means is we have to tell our own story. Because if we allow the hunter to continually tell the story, he is always going to be the victor and he is always going to be the hero. So if we don't tell our own story, we have to be the historians and we have to be the hunters, the lions in our own story. So, bringing it current a little bit. So, what is CRT and why is it scaring some white people? So, what do you guys know about critical race theory? Anybody know anything about critical race theory?
It's basically telling how IS was. They are afraid of it because it's telling the truth.
It is telling the truth, for sure. Pastor Johnson.
It's looking at history and then tying it to the present and how those systemic injustices inform all of the systems that we're under.
Yes.
In one way or another.
Yes. So it's actually even bigger because a lot of people think, and especially if you turn on Fox News, they think we just about to be telling everybody that white people was wrong. That's not what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is a framework. It's a way, it started out in law, believe it or not. It started off as a legal way to represent in the way that lawyers would frame things in order to get people to understand how race plays a part in things. It started off as a legal theory and it moved into education. So what it is a way that you teach that brings in race, because there's nothing that happens in this country that race does not play a part in. Absolutely nothing. There's no system that race does not touch. So it's a way of looking at things, right? That's what critical race theory is. What it is not is about promoting racism or reverse racism, because that's what people will lead you to believe, or assigning blame to individuals because of their race. This is not about blaming white people. It is about analyzing things within a framework that, to your point, tells you the truth, right? So this is a quick thing since we're talking about Africa. And this is why we need critical race. It says you've been bamboozled. Remember, you've been run them up, led astray. So we are going to take a look at this. Let me see how I get this over. Pastor Johnson showed me already. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh, not that. Oh, is that on mine? It's on mine. Hold on. Pastor Side is the tech person. No, it's not on
It's
mine.
6,400 kilometers.
Oh, hold on.
But from here to here, which only looks like
Definitely
half the
gotta scroll
size,
back.
is 7,200. The continent of Africa has been shown smaller than it actually is. What if I told you that Greenland was only this size? Or Russia was this size? Or the US and Canada were?
Sure.
You know what? This is the real map.
Okay, here we go.
Let me show you something. This is the world map. And this is Rome. What if I told you that from here to here, it's 6,400 kilometers, but from here to here, which only looks like half the size, is 7,200. The continent of Africa has been shown smaller than it actually is. What if I told you that Greenland was only this size? Or Russia was this size? Or the US and Canada were much smaller? You know what? This is the real map. Look at Sweden, Finland, and Norway. They're much smaller now. Or Greenland is tiny. Maybe it wasn't practical, but it seems unfair towards Africa. Why haven't we been told this in school?
So, did y'all see what happened?
Let me show you something.
Uh-oh.
This is the...
So did y'all see what happened there as far as that map? So, how many of y'all remember seeing that map where it looked like Africa is the same size as the United States? Absolutely false. You can fit the United States and Africa 3 times. So, you can fit the United States and Canada and Mexico safely in Africa. So this is an attempt to diminish, even in something as simple as maps, what the real scale of what Africa really is. Africa is humongous. It is the biggest landmass on the planet. It is not tiny. I remember back in the day they used to call it the dark continent, right? They called it the dark continent because they literally would tell us. I remember having a teacher in school, this is not too long ago, that there was nobody in and nothing came out of Africa. Like no culture, nothing. They were so insulated. They was running around like a bunch of savages and pygmies, and that's just what Africa was. And even in the maps, they show it in a very small way to even in that reduce Africa's contribution. So this is kind of an example of why it is that we talk about CRT and why CRT is important, because things like that matter, right? And since we're talking about Africa, I feel like we really need to hit on why, even starting there, that the maps that you look at is not a fair representation of what Africa is. So this is Africa. It's a collection of all kind of countries, right? The people of Africa had a rich and diverse history of culture centuries before Europeans arrived. Empires were large and powerful with monarchs, very, very elaborate political structures and systems. And then there were other areas that were smaller, village-like, and they relied a lot on agreements between people. And unfortunately, I think this is what we still think that Africa was, right? We think that that's our history, is that we were kind of all in the bush, and it was, you know, we romanticize what Africa is a lot too. So, you know, we were kings and queens in Africa. No, all of us were not. We were not all kings and queens in Africa. Africa had just as sophisticated as a society as we have here today. They had rulers, they had underclass, they had people who worked for a living, they had different people who had different jobs, and this is ancient Africa. This isn't like modern Africa. And I think a lot of times we romanticize it, and in our romanticizing it, it kind of cheapens who we really are, because we were advanced enough not to just be a bunch of hunters and gatherers loving each other, you know, and with that comes, you know, understanding that our culture, even before colonization, was broad, but it also brings in some unfortunate realities about the slave trade, how we contributed to our own demise. So those are things we don't like to touch on, but if we don't touch on those are a lot of the reasons why we don't learn from our history, right? So this is Africa as it's cut out as far as countries. This is a little less known because we really don't talk about the kinship groups in Africa. If you look at this map, this is a map where we just saw from this map where the countries are. This map right here is a map of the different kinship groups in Africa. So, and I'm gonna talk about the Arab up here because that's misleading. I just couldn't find the right map. All of this is not Arab, but we're gonna talk about that for sure. But because we don't really exactly know who we are and what we come from. They're anywhere right now, and back then it was more. Right now, as it stands, there are 1,000 to 2,000 different languages spoken in Africa. Yep, 1,000 to 2,000 different languages and different dialects. Africa is home to approximately 1/3 of the world's languages. The diversity in Africa is immense. So, Fula is not the same as Sarah. You know, Yoruba is completely different than Somali culture. So a lot of times we think Swahili covers all of Africa, and Swahili is actually native to East Africa. And we all, most of us in African Americans, we come from right in here. This is where we come from, because this is where the west coast of Africa. So most African Americans come right in here. So, you know, we hear about Xhosas down here. 9 times out of 10 African Americans are not Xhosa. 9 times out of 10 we are not from, we don't really do Swahili. We are Akan, Mandinka, Mende, Fula, Wolof, Bambara, Yoruba, Hausa. This is where primarily we are as African Americans, right?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the reason why? Is that the section where they was pulled from their homes?
Yep, so I wish I had a world map. So if I had a world map, what you'll see, and we're gonna talk about that next class, why the triangle, why it's called the triangle slave trade sometimes, because right in here, if you go directly over, that's the Americas. So what they did was they came over, and up here is Britain. So Britain started it. Portugal, which is right up here on the map, started it, and they just came on down the coast and was pulling people. But Britain got in on the fun. So they came over, came over, dropped off some people in the Caribbean over here, went back to America over here, came back over here, and got more people. So it looked like this was right next to the Atlantic Ocean. So that's why they got us. They weren't gonna go all into the interior because it just didn't serve their purposes. So they focused primarily right in here, and right in here is what they also called the Gold Coast, because it was so rich in resources. In Ghana, and we'll talk about that a little bit, Ghana has so much gold. Mali has so much gold. And they're still over there, how can I say this? They're still right now to this day pillaging Africa. Right to this day, pillaging Africa for its resources. And now it's not so much the European, it's the Chinese. They're absolutely pillaging Africa right now. So, we are going to move on. So, I put this book in here because if anybody wants a book recommendation and maybe you have not read it, this is an excellent book. It should be required reading for every African American, teenager, period, or adult who is interested in African American history. It's called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And the reason why I brought it up in this class is because it is a narrative, a story of a man in Africa. He was Ife, and it is the beginning of colonization, when colonization first hit and how things unraveled for him and for his culture. And they did it, Chinua Achebe wrote it in such a masterful way, you didn't even know what was happening. Like, it was just such a well-wrote story, but it was absolutely talking about colonization in Africa and how everything fell apart, right? So, for things to fall apart, that means we had to have something to fall apart. Because we had very unique and very, very good systems and very complex systems of how we live. And to a degree, it all fell apart once colonialism hit. Because not only were people being taken out of Africa, what happened was people were going into Africa. So this is colonization.
Leah.
Oh, you got a question? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Yes.
on the book,
Uh-huh.
you know, I would get somebody to order it for me, but, because I don't deal with it. But is this something that we can get on Amazon?
Absolutely. You can get it on Amazon. And I got some copies. I just didn't go to the storage. So I'll bring some copies tomorrow because when I was a principal up in Cleveland, I made my kids read it at the school that I was at. And I had a bunch of extra copies because I overbought them and I took them with me.
How much,
So,
how much are they?
and I'm not gonna charge nobody. I'm just gonna give them away. But if you order it off of Amazon, you can get a paperback for like $5, $6.
Oh.
Yeah, they're not expensive, but it is definitely a good book to put in your collection. It's called Things Fall Apart. So this is Africa after colonization. So as you can see, the United Kingdom got a big swatch of Africa. Over here, United Kingdom, France. If you go to Senegal right now, they speak French. Senegalese, they speak French.
Tell us which colors are which.
I'm sorry, you can't see it.
Which one is the Dutch?
The Dutch. So Dutch were primarily in like the Rwanda area. They were like around in here, but they had a small piece. They weren't really. Dutch was they the ones who started that conflict in Rwanda. If anybody ever seen Hotel Rwanda, that was the Dutch. Dutch did that, but it wasn't as they didn't have as big of a piece. But these are the main colonizers.
Belgium.
Belgium is one for sure. The main colonizers are the United Kingdom, which is Britain, and they are in pink. There were people just as recently as like the 60s and 70s getting emancipated from Britain. Like, yeah, like Ghana. That's why you hear people like Kwame Nkrumah. He was a president of Ghana, and he, in the 60s, you know, fought for the emancipation from Britain in the 60s. So Kwame Nkrumah. So pink is Britain. Blue is France. Green is Portugal. Yellow is Spain. Germany got in on it. And they're gray. Belgium is purple. And that's kind of like where that Belgium Dutch, that's over in there. That's where that Hotel Rwanda stuff happened. Blue is Liberia, and we're gonna talk about Liberia because Liberia is a really different case, and yellow is Ethiopia. But they're not colonized, that's just what those are. Liberia is a different case. Everybody heard of Marcus Garvey, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Marcus Garvey, remember when Marcus Garvey was doing the Back to Africa, sending people back to Africa, and he had the starship that was sending people like literally back to Africa? That's where they were sending them to, is Liberia. So Liberia is a strange case, and it's really fascinating because what happened in Liberia is that all the formerly enslaved African Americans went over to Liberia, and they did not get along too too well with the Africans who were already there, and it created a bunch of havoc, and that havoc was exasperated by outside forces. So Liberia is a really strange case where it looked like African Americans repatriating would have been wonderful, and it ended up being a whole total mess. So that's where he was sending people, is right over here to Liberia. Ethiopia was free, and Liberia was free. They did not deal with colonization. That's why Haile Selassie is so revered, because he was a ruler in Ethiopia, and he would not allow for colonization. So, any other questions about colonization before we move on?
Are there still countries that are not independent in Africa today?
Yes, there are countries that are. They don't call them not independent. They call them colonies. Well, I mean there's colonies. Yes, a lot. There's still colonies of other people in Africa right now to this day. And even if they don't call them a colony, they're still so fiercely controlled by outside forces. Okay. So, like we said, as far as like when we're talking about like the different ethnic groups, even though, like I said, there was 1,000 to 2,000 different languages to this day being spoken in Africa, there is some similarity across the continent, right? And there are some similarities as it deals with worldview. And there are some things that pretty much indigenous, like back in the day in Africa, you can pretty much count on all across African continent. And one of those is called the African-centered worldview. And that worldview incorporates ideas that there is an interconnectedness of all things, the spiritual nature of human beings, the collective and individual identity, the collective inclusive nature of family, the family structure, the oneness of mind, body, and spirit, and the value of interpersonal relationships. So this is where we get caught up on when we think about Africa, because we super over-romanticize Africa, because we think like this is Africa. And to a degree it was. This is definitely the principles that most indigenous people live by. Not just Africans, but most indigenous people across the planet live by these kind of one with nature. There's an interconnectedness of all things. We've seen it with the Native Americans here. You know, we learned about that. So that reigns true in Africa too. I read somewhere, and I thought it was a unique theory that said that the reason why you find that interconnectedness and that peace with, you know, countries like Africa and warmer countries is because nature was giving, and nature was looked at as a partner. So when they developed, they looked at nature as something like a partner, where when you go to like colder places, nature was looked at as something to overcome. So they never had that interconnectedness, and it was always like, we are going to overcome nature, we're gonna beat nature down. So that would be like Europeans, and like, you know, that it's just a different worldview because of a different way that they looked at things. And I was like, that probably is true.
So it's like cooperating with nature versus trying to conquer it.
Yes, depending on because everything is evolution, right? So they evolved into these things, and so their worldview was like, we getting everything we need from nature, we need to protect it, you know what I mean? Where if you're in a cold, harsh climate, it's like, we gotta survive nature, we need to conquer it. So I thought that was interesting, so I thought I would bring it up here. So, we are going to talk about animism. And we're going to talk about animism in the church, which can be scary a little bit, right? But I want you guys to keep an open mind about what it is that we are seeing, right? So, and I made these pictures very, very intentional. So first, let's talk about what animism is. And animism is something that is across most indigenous African worldviews and religions. So, animism is the belief that objects, places, creatures, and everything has some type of a spirit or has some type of a interconnectedness with God. Animism perceives all things, animals, plants, rocks, rivers, weather systems, humans, all things have agency, There's no categorical difference between the spiritual and the physical world, so that there is a soul in everything. Examples include like water deities, tree spirits, and animism may further attribute a life force to abstract concepts such as words, like your words have life to them. So kind of no different than us saying speak life into people. And that's what I want to do, is connect some of the things that we still believe so that it doesn't make Africa seem as mystic. Because a lot of times what happens is, if we are not careful, what's the Malcolm X quote? But it kind of relates. If we're not careful, we will allow the story that has been told to us, which is an oppressive story, make us not like stuff about who we are or who we were as a people. So we'll hear voodoo and we'll be like, oh my God. Or we'll see pictures of animism and we'll be like, oh my God, when really we share a lot of similarities with it, because I say speak life all the time, speak life into people. Africans believe that words, you could speak life into people. So when they're looking like they're worshiping trees, they're not worshiping trees, they see God in everything. So everything has a purpose, everything has meaning. So I put these purposely so that I found the most kind of jarring ones I could find, because what you're seeing is exaggerated features of natural things. So that's all it is. It's not that they're wicked, they're not evil, they're exaggerating the features of the nature that they see around them because they're calling on nature in some type of way. So all of those dances that you see, Africans sometimes do, and because this is also animism, they're calling on spirits, or they're calling on the spirits, and to a degree, what do we say? The Holy Spirit took over. The Holy Spirit enter in Holy Spirit, same thing, different continent, different day. They're calling on the Spirit of God to enter in, right? So this is not necessarily scary. It is exaggerated for a purpose. It's exaggerated for a reason. Nobody over there thinks that this is scary. They know it's just a costume. Well, to them it's not a costume, but what it is just an over-exaggerated character that they're putting on to give reverence to the natural world. That's all it is. So, we're going to talk about oral tradition. So, Africans did not write a lot of history down. And we 100% brought that back with us. It's called the oral tradition. Africans spoke and told stories and communicated the history through the spoken word. They didn't do a lot of writing down of their history. And we 100% do that right now, here to this day. From church to the way our kids learn, it is a proven fact that African American kids learn better orally, and when they're able to talk and when they're able to dialect. African American kids learn better because they're raised in households where we do a lot of talking. And we do a lot of singing, and we do a lot of passing things down in that way. So we absolutely brought that back with us from Africa. It's called the oral tradition, and it was a necessary social thing where it was visible through proverbs. We love a proverb. Folk tales, songs, dances, customs, and religious practices, right? So young folks probably don't remember, but anybody remember what the signifying monkey stories were? Do anybody remember them? Ah, he laughing. It is not. However, Dolomite stole that. Ask your family, but ask your people about Dolomite. So Dolomite.
Rudy Ray Moore.
Yeah, so Rudy Ray Moore used to do these things called signifying monkey, and it would be a mess.
Yes.
But what it is he took that and he made it crazy. But signifying monkey is a story that was passed down from grandmas and generations on down, and he took it and twisted it. But what it is they're stories that were literally passed down from Africa. Literally. Almost the same characters. And I always tell that story because I think it's amazing that the characters found their way to stay while we were in America. So I'm not telling y'all to go listen to Dolomite. However, look up Signifying Monkeys, and there's stories that were passed down that we 100% brought back from Africa orally. We never wrote any of that down. All of those stories came back because we kept them in our head and we told them to our kids, right?
And most of them told stories about life, like lion
Yes.
and
Yep, the lion and the trickster rabbit, yeah. So all of them were stories about how like this trickster rabbit would trick this lion into doing stuff. So that's what the Signifying Monkey things were. And that's completely from Africa.
yeah, right.
That's where Walt Disney stole a lot of that too.
What, the Signifying Monkeys?
And
Some of the
his
characters and
Oh, Rafiki kind of was signifying, wasn't he?
the characters.
He was. I never
Pocahontas,
thought about that.
Rafiki stuff, they would steal that.
Huh.
Yeah.
Cause Rafiki was a griot. Rafiki. So we gonna get into what a griot was, but I never even thought about that. But Rafiki's whole thing was telling the history. Remember who you are, you know. So he was like telling the story. Remember, he took him back. That is right, and he was a little monkey. So yeah, so I never even thought about that. But yeah, so that is the story. So we are gonna talk about griots. Griots were super, 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 super important in African American culture. So these were people. They were a specialized group, and you can even call them a caste. Because a group is just a group of people. A caste means you are born into this group and you cannot get out of it. So griots, if you were born into a griot family, you were a griot. You had to marry a griot, your kids was gonna be griots, because this is literally how the history was passed down. So the griots were a specialized group, meaning most of them only could marry fellow griots and passed on the storytelling tradition down the family line. All kings had griots, and all griots had kings, and most villages had their own griot. A village griot would relate stories of topics including births, deaths, marriages, battles, and hunts, and they would sing it. They would sing it to the people. So that's how they remembered their history, because it was a group of families' sole responsibility to carry the history of their people and make sure everybody knew it. Griots had the main responsibility for keeping the stories of the individual tribes and families, and it's always accompanied by some type of musical instrument. They played a super part in West African events such as weddings, where they sang the family history of the bride and groom, and it's also a role to settle disputes and act as a mediator, because respect and familiarity with the griot meant that they could approach both parties without being attacked, and they could initiate peace negotiation between hostile parties. So, I am going to show you, here we go again, let me try and do it a little bit quicker this time. Okay, so that's interesting, hold on one second. Let's see.
Signifying monkey, you gonna make me go on? I ain't thought about that in a long time.
It's strictly African. It is 100% African.
You gotta look up the good ones though, not the
Dolomite.
Dolomite one. Do you need something coming up? Then take it big. You have to look at the cursor on there and play.
Okay, so this is an example of a griot. And this is a current griot, because griots still exist. And I'm not going to play this whole thing, because it's 5 minutes long.
Jola,
and just sing the histories. So when, you know, there's a lot to your subconscious mind. So if you just hearing it, you're still getting it fed into you. You know what I mean? So it's not like turning on the radio, you know, listening to the radio. It's actually them out there singing the history of their people. So they would go to weddings, they would do it in a more formal way, but this is the informal way, because they would literally, a family would just sit out and sing out the history of their people. This right here is called a djembe. It is a precursor to the fiddle, believe it or not. This right here, the precursor to the fiddle. So African slaves remembered the djembe, and they would whittle it down south, and whittling it down south, hearing it, because you can hear it, it sounds fiddleish, right? Like you can hear that fiddleish sound, and so the white folks down south, like bluegrass, like what in like Kentucky and stuff, they would hear it, and then they kind of took the djembe and they fashioned it into a fiddle, and it ended up becoming a fiddle, but the catalyst for it was the djembe. So, we are going to move on.
Now, I have a question.
Yes.
Are there the people that live there, are they big people or little people?
In Africa?
Yeah, in that part right there.
Right here? I'm not sure. I mean, I think they normal people. I think the only categorically small people are pygmies, and pygmies are real, and they are shorter than most people, and it's still a real kinship group. For whatever reason, they just grow small, but pygmies are real. But those aren't pygmies. Yeah, those are just normal sized people. Yeah, those are normal sized. Uh-oh. Okay, wait. Okay, where am I at? Uh-oh, wait. Uh-oh. Hold on. Uh-oh.
What are you trying to do?
Get back to where I was at. Oh, okay, here we are. Okay, so this again has been passed down. So that type of like communication, that oral tradition, that singing songs, people would say hip hop, people would say rap music. That idea of storytelling, that's definitely been passed down. We still kept a lot of it. And I think I'm gonna skip this because I'm gonna go into this next time. I wanted to go into Santeria, but I'm not. So quickly, I wanted to put a cultural pin right here. So this is not necessarily what we're gonna dive into right now, but I did want to put a cultural pin right here because we tend to think that we did not pull and we didn't bring anything with us from Africa, and that's really not true. So Santeria is worship type that you'll find in Brazil, South America, and quick fun fact, there's more Africans in Brazil than they have the most Africans in Brazil than any other place outside of Africa itself. So Brazil has the most Africans in it. So there's a very big Afro-Brazilian culture. So Brazilians are, and they say there's places in Brazil that are more African than Africa because of colonization. So what happened in the slave trade is when they dropped them off first, the Spaniards down there didn't really bother them too much about their religion the way that they bothered us about our religion. We weren't able to keep aspects of it. So Santeria is a combination of Yoruba tradition and Catholicism. That's why majority of people in South America are Catholic, because it spoke to them, because in Yoruba tradition, they identified with one big God and a bunch of little gods, because that's kind of like what they came from in Africa, was one big God and a bunch of little gods, and they saw the God in priests. You know how like in Catholicism they'll have saint whoever, saint this, saint that, saint. They looked at this like a bunch of little gods, and to them that was the same thing that they were practicing, so they combined it and they made their own cultural tradition called Santeria. And I think I gotta go into it because I can't go into Europe without going into Santeria.
To me, they treat the Pope like he a god. I mean, that might just be
That's
me,
very
but-
similar.
It is.
Very similar.
It is, very. Because they think that you have one big God, which is one big God, and then you have all these little intermediary people who
Right.
help you, right? So they look at them like saints. So let me go and try to find out how to, I hate going back and forth. It is, oh, okay, hold on. Gmail, I hate it. Okay. Okay, let me do this. Okay, so I am going to, wait, move it over.
Yes, right.
Okay. And then I'm going to move my cursor and I'm going to make it big. And then I'm going to text that. And I'm going to play. Where am I at? Play. Oh. So this is in, actually it's in Cuba, believe it or not. Yep, it's in Cuba. So this is them praise dancing. This is just them praise dancing, and this is a impromptu kind of religious service, but they're praise dancing. And they are praying, they're conjuring up the spirit of Ogun. So Ogun is one of the lesser gods, and just like in Catholicism, you know how you pray to Saint such and such, the patron saint of, I don't know. I remember I lost my keys one time, and somebody was like, pray to Saint somebody, the
Right.
patron saint of losing stuff. I was like, okay. I was like, okay. So you don't, they didn't tell me to go pray to God. They said pray to the patron saint of whoever. No different. They're not praising some other god, and that's what that's unfortunately what we think. They're just speaking to the lower gods because they feel God got bigger things to do. He ain't got time to be dealing with us down here. He got bigger stuff to handle. We gonna deal with these lower gods because those are the ones who help us in our everyday life. And they talk to the big man, but he don't have time for us in our shenanigans. So we are going to talk to these lesser ones. So this is them calling on the spirit of Ogun. And it just depends on what they're worshiping and why they're worshiping and who they call on, right? So, the reason why I went on ahead and said that I probably do want to talk about that is because you cannot talk about Africa in any aspect without talking about the Yoruba tradition, because the Yoruba faith tradition is probably one of the biggest faith traditions in all of Africa. Even to this day. More people are, when you find people connecting to African spirituality, they're usually connecting with Yoruba tradition. So even African Americans, when they're like, I want to reconnect, for whatever reason, we gravitate towards Yoruba tradition. So you find more Yorubas in America, even nowadays, people who are identifying with the Yoruba tradition even in America. So, quickly, because I don't want to belabor the point. Ooh, not at all do I want to belabor the point. Okay, so Yoruba mythology revolves around the supreme being and three manifestations of it. Not the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, but still three manifestations of the supreme being. The three manifestations of the supreme being in Yoruba tradition is Olodumare. He symbolizes a divine entity with no father, no mother, that simultaneously is not bound by space, time, or dimension. Olorun, he is the ruler of the heavens. And Olofi, He is the ruler of the earth, and he's known as the conduit between the two. So, one big God, three big manifestations, right? So, quickly, I'm just going to show you like some examples of some of the lower gods. Y'all heard Shango. Like, Shango is like something that we say when we African American, it's like, if I ain't heard of nothing, I heard of the name Shango, because that just sounds African, right? So, Shango is a real deity in Yoruba tradition. He's the most powerful and the lower gods are called the Orisha. So, he is the most powerful and feared of all their Orishas. He casts a thunderstone on anyone who offends him. So, he's very, very powerful. He's looking like a black Thor. And they all are represented by colors too. So a lot of times when they are calling on the spirit of Shango, which means they need some strength, they dealing with something for real, so they calling on Shango, they will represent him by wearing red. So what you see in the other picture here is an actual ceremony where they're actually wearing red, because a lot of these deities correlate with color. Abaluye, he is another male
I have a
deity.
question.
Oh,
on Shango.
Shango?
According to the definition, it says Shanga has something to do with Christianity.
I ain't never heard that one.
What definition?
It says, like other global city, Shanga is a dynamic hub of Christianity.
Oh, that's a
You're
city.
thinking of a city called
Yeah.
Shango.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a city. Is it
No, no,
Shanga or O?
No, you're looking at Shanghai.
Oh, that's China.
oh,
Shanghai.
oh, okay,
Yes.
sorry.
That's okay.
That's
That's
okay.
okay. That's good.
Appreciate it. Yes.
Okay.
What does it mean about the people wearing green in the back?
Oh, he sees different colors.
Oh, I don't know. You know what? I don't even want to speculate. I think they just dress the same. Or they might, I don't know. You know what? I have no
Maybe
idea.
they represent some other god.
They might
or
represent
some
another
other-
god, because this might be a festival where they calling on multiple gods. It could be. Yep. But good observation.
And just, not to intrude, but almost like we've seen in movies like a Black Panther or whatever, where you have different tribes or they honor different
Yes.
things and they dress accordingly.
Yep.
That was fictional, but it was meant to harken back to that
Mhm.
kind of motif almost.
Yes, and absolutely, and you'll actually see some things. Black Panther, I think, did a good job of like pulling in a lot of like real cultural things in there, because those councils that you did see in Black Panther, those were really representative of what I've been taught in African history. I mean, they had different tribes represented, like the one with the lip. That's a completely different person than this one, because you saw one of these. Remember the one that had all the hair hanging off? This is Obaluye. He is another male Orisha, and he is the earth. He is the Orisha of earth and healing and respect for the elderly. He promotes a cure for infectious diseases and is called on to prevent infirmity. So if somebody is sick, they may pray to Obaluye. He is also always close to death, they said, because I guess when he pulls in the sickness from other people, it makes him sick and he has to go regenerate. So this is Obaluye, and this is actually somebody dressed as if they're calling in Obaluye. Yes.
What's that dog in the picture for?
I don't know why they got a dog down there. That's just
Right.
Obaluye like dogs. I don't know why. So this is an artist depiction.
Cartoon.
These kids they gonna observe. I have no idea, and it looks so American of a dog too. But in any case, this is an artist depiction. This is somebody who is actually dressed as him, right? And BJ, I really put these in because I guarantee y'all have seen these. If you've seen any African art at a museum, you have seen these depictions of these twins. Yep. I guarantee some of y'all might have them in your house, and they may be made in China. And however, this is where it comes from. So another thing in Black Panther, remember when he got mad and took the artifacts back? And he was like, y'all done stole all of our artifacts? That is 100% real. They bum rushed the continent, and you find all of our stuff not in Africa and not in the hands of African people. You find them in the hands of British museums and French museums. They have stole or artifacts something serious. So if you've been to any museum and they got like their little African section, I guarantee you've seen these. That is from Yoruba tradition. That is a depiction of the god Abije, and they are always depicted as twins. I thought it was such a cool story, but if one twin dies, it is thought to be like bad luck. So twins are revered in Yoruba tradition. You have twins, they're like, oh, y'all the greatest, you know what I mean? So twins are super revered because they believe they are the reincarnation of these gods. If one of them passes, they think that's super bad luck. So what they'll do is they'll carve a stone, one of these, and they'll have to treat it like their baby, like their spirit, and like dress it and things like that. In Yoruba culture, the twins are Taiwo, which is the first twin, and Kehinde, which is the second twin. But it believes that the second twin, the older one is Kehinde, the second twin, but Taiwo, he goes out in the world first, checks out the world, and then tells Kehinde that he can come on out. Wow. So, yeah, so that's the idea behind Abije. So I'm going to skip forward because I want to get to the girls. Oshun, she is the most popular goddess in Yoruba tradition. She is thought to be the goddess of love, intimacy, beauty, wealth, femininity, fertility. She is like the it girl of Yoruba tradition. She is always represented by the color yellow. Where'd Mariah go? Oh, Mariah ain't even here. That is her color. So, Oshun is definitely the most popular woman Orisha. She was the one sent by Olodumare to help Shango and other male Orishas build the earth, because as their tradition tells it, the male spirits attempted to make the world without female influence, but this exclusion led the world to fail. And in the end, Oshun was, in the end he sent her because he was like, these men need some help. Go down here and help these men. And so Oshun was allowed to work, and Shango forced all the other spirits to respect Oshun as they would respect him. So that is Oshun. And I put a picture of Beyonce up here because she is always channeling this. I don't know if you recognize her now, but she said it a couple times where that yellow that she wears, this is why I said, like, a lot of people are kind of tapping into, not because they want to take it up as a practice, but at least understand where we came from. So I'm not saying that she into witchcraft or anything like that, but I'm saying that she has said that she is representing Oshun, like her divine femininity, and like, so that's why she wears yellow a lot of times, in a lot of the things that she does. So I'm not gonna do it. Olokun is a very, I thought she was kind of powerful, but she is the Orisha of the seas and the oceans. And if you notice, women are always associated with water. You will always find women Orisha or female Orishas are associated with water. Yes, Marvis?
What's on her face?
A mask. So all of them. So Oshun is also a goddess of rivers. Olokun is the goddess of seas and oceans, and she is revered as the ruler of all water, and she has authority over all of the water. She is the mother of all the water. She is majorly seen as female, but some communities say that she can take on male and female forms. Olokun is highly revered for her ability to give great wealth, health, and prosperity, and is worshipped in many African nations, even outside of Yoruba tradition. So I thought that she was kind of cool.
Well, could that be most of them are female water, because water is supposed to be sustain life?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
And Shango, back to him. Would he be the example, the equivalent of Zeus then in the Greek?
Somewhat.
Okay.
Somewhat, yeah, because Zeus was like the high god, commanded the thunder. So yeah.
So they stole Shango and made him Zeus, probably.
Probably though. No, for real. Probably. So this is the last one. Is Yamoya. She is the mother of all Orishas, and she is the patron deity of women and another river. She cures infertility in women and is a source of wealth and is deeply protective and cares deeply for children. She is not quick to anger, but can be very destructive and violent when angry. So she is depicted as a mermaid. Yes. Fun fact, mermaids are interwoven all throughout African culture. So when they say, that's why I was like, we just don't know our history. So when they was all mad because the Little Mermaid was black, we been black. We didn't need no Disney. We been black mermaids. So yes. So when all that mess was going on about the mermaids, so Yemoja was depicted as a mermaid. Yeah, so you can tell them, no, we did not need Disney. So, this is the last part that we're gonna go through. And so now you kind of understand like some of like African worldview and how we looked at things and how we were so connected to nature. And that's what I wanted us to understand. This is a quick timeline of African civilization from the cradle of civilization. And I know y'all like, how are we gonna go from the cradle of civilization to slavery? We're going to get this done in like 20 minutes, I promise. Because I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I'm just going to go into how the timeline worked, right? So timeline of African civilization, Egypt. Egypt. We all want to claim Egypt. There is something about claiming Egypt that black people don't see nothing else but Egypt, right? So Egypt is definitely important in that grand scheme of world culture. Because Egypt, as you can see, lasted. Now remember, we're talking about BCE. Who knows what BCE means?
Before Christ.
Before Christ, before Common Era, yes. So it goes down. The timeline goes down, and then when the birth of Christ hits, it starts to go back up, right? So Egypt existed 3,000 years before Christ. So it is one of the oldest civilizations. So people want to latch on to Egypt because they know it was one of the oldest civilizations. However, that is very political because as much as you'll hear about Egypt, you will hear a lot less about the Nubians. So the reason why black people think of themselves as Nubians and they call ourselves Nubians is because Nubians predated Egypt, something serious. Egypt was not the first civilization. It absolutely wasn't. Right here is very important. So this is the Nile River, right? The Nile River flows up. You know, most rivers is very different than a lot of rivers in the world because most rivers, you'll see the tributaries in the sea and it flows down from the sea. This river, for some reason, flows up from inward, the interior Africa, up towards the sea. Why is that important? Why do you think that's important to know that the Nile goes from the interior to the outside? Why do you think that's important to know?
Say that again.
So the Nile River is different in the way that it goes from the interior of Africa, goes upwards.
Because typically rivers come from big bodies of water and into a area.
Yeah, so typically that happens. The other reason why this is very important to note because civilization follows the path of rivers. That just is what it is. They don't.
I missed what was the importance.
So I'm getting to it. So civilizations, they follow the flow of rivers. They follow the path of rivers. You can look it up. Most civilizations follow the flow of rivers. So the reason why that's important is because in here, which is Sudan, which is where it would be like the present day kind of cradle of civilization, they followed that river up. And the first person that they found, which is why they said, oh, you know, Bill Clinton got out there and gave us our props or whatever. It's like, oh, everything started in Africa. They found that evidence in Sudan, right? So Sudan flows up. So life literally followed the river upwards. And it doesn't make sense for the cradle of civilization to be in Phoenicia like they try to tell us in school. Because this is what they try to tell us in school is that the cradle of civilization was right in here in Euphrates. Absolutely not. The cradle of civilization was right around in here and it followed the river upwards into here. And life and it's not just life like it was a bunch of Neanderthals running around in Sudan. As we'll see, the civilization of Nubia completely was very much developed It was not a civilization of little monkey people. It was a highly developed civilization in Nubia that definitely influenced everything that we see in Egypt, right? So Herodotus, wait a minute. Oh, it says known for rich deposits of gold, Nubia was also the gateway through which luxury products like incense, ivory, ebony traveled from their source in sub-Saharan Africa to the civilizations in Egypt and the Mediterranean. They had archers of exceptional skill and provided military strength for Nubian rulers. They had rulers. So how are you going to say that the first civilization started here if it is found that all kind of artifacts? And the reason why they know that is because they found artifacts all throughout here, and they know that civilization started down in here. They had a sophisticated society with an army, with artifacts, with art, with culture. That is the quintessential piece of any any high society is when you start making art. Because that is like, because I wanted to be an anthropologist when I was young. So I do remember from my anthropology classes, when you start making art, that's when they like, oh, y'all are in advanced society. Because most of the time, you trying to survive. Ain't nobody got time for no art. Nobody has time to be making art. We trying to survive. So once you are out of survival mode, then you can look around and make art. They found art all the way in Nubia. So Nubians were an advanced society, so it did not start up here.
Can you point on this part of the map? I don't know if you were circling on your things, but just because we couldn't see where you were. Yeah.
So Nubia is right in here.
Okay.
Sudan, this is present day Sudan. Nubia would have been right in here. The Nile River goes this way. It flows from the interior and it goes upwards. So this is the path that civilization traveled, going upwards into what is now Egypt. It did not start in Egypt. It did not start here and come down. That's a whole lie. It started from here and came up. Yes?
And to that point, when I went to Israel, if you go to the Museum of Jerusalem, those dark twin figures, the twin God figures, they're in the museum.
Wow.
And I pointed out to our guide, the American guide, and it was off to the side. It was its own little display that they don't highlight.
Yep.
And I said, well, where all those little dark figures come from? And he said, well, when they migrated up this way.
Yep.
I said, so it did not start here?
Nope.
And they said, no. But it's not something they say frequently and openly.
Yep. Because
and they weren't going to say it.
Yeah, because when I was in school, we were told that the Tigris and the Euphrates was the cradle of civilization. I was flat out told that. Yes.
Right.
I was flat out told that. This is why we need CRT, because it's a whole lie.
And the crescent,
the Fertile Crescent. You're absolutely right. Absolute lie. So yes. So we're gonna get into this too, right? So a lot of times when we're thinking about Egypt, we think about Arabs, right? Those were not the original people. Sorry, we're not. Herodotus, and not that we need white folks to validate us, but I feel like it needs to be said. So Herodotus was the father of history, so they call him, because he was the first historian to collect and systematically document events to create an account, right? So he was a Greek dude. And he compiled his accounts into a single major work known as the Histories. So this is what Herodotus said, which is, he is 100% Greek. So he said, he described the Egyptians as dark-skinned with woolly hair like their neighbors to the south, the Cushites. Unlike present-day Europeans, Herodotus, another thing we gotta realize is that racism is a social construct. Back then, they really didn't have as much racism, even though there were differences amongst the people. He was just out there like, this is what I see, this is what I see, this is what I see, because it wasn't politicized as much yet. So by the time he came around though, 100% Egypt was a very multicultural place. That's why I tell people all the time, let them have Cleopatra. Let them have Cleopatra. Because honestly, by the time Cleopatra came into power, it was the end of the dynasty. Don't nobody care about her. She was an insignificant ruler who only his claim to fame is Mark Antony. She was very much insignificant. They ain't built the pyramid. They ain't built nothing. The pyramids were built within the first 4 dynasties of Egypt. Egypt had 31 dynasties.
Wow.
The pyramids were built in the first 4. Them were Nubians. Those were 100% Nubians, right? Oh, and if you look, these are some of the old artifacts of some of the Nubians. So they black, them is black folks, right?
You can see their features.
You can see their features. So, like I said, there were 31 dynastic periods in Egypt. The pyramids were built in the first 4. 31. Cleopatra came at the fairy tale end when the Greeks and stuff then invaded and all of this stuff. Because Egypt, you gotta think, Egypt lasted 1,300 years. It was 1300 years they lasted. So 13,000. 13,000 years was the rule of Egypt. Black people wasn't running it that whole time, because by the time, the later years, it had got conquered, then it had new rulers, it got conquered again, then it had new rulers, and by this time, 13,000 years, it became very multicultural, very. So, but back when it first started, those were the Nubians who traveled up the Nile, settled in Egypt, and started these dynastic pyramids because they already had a well-developed society, right? So again, remember, 31 dynastic periods, the pyramids were built in 4. This was the first pyramid that was built in Egypt. It's called the Step Pyramid of Djoser. So, the oldest known pyramid in Egypt was built around 2630 BC at Saqqara for the 3rd dynasty, King Djoser. Known as Step Pyramid, it began as a traditional kind of burial place, but grew into something much more ambitious. As the story goes, the pyramid's architect was Imhotep. How many of y'all heard of Imhotep?
That's from the mommy movies, right?
The who?
The mommy movies.
Yes, but he ain't look like that. So Imhotep, we gonna talk about Imhotep too, but yes, they depicted Imhotep as a whole white man. But as the story goes, the pyramid's architect was Imhotep. He was a priest and a healer, and they made him evil too, didn't they? He was not an evil. Oh, see how they do us? He was not an evil person. He was actually regarded as still one of the most brilliant minds ever in the history of ever. He was not a, oh, they did him so wrong in that movie.
Well, what
But
happened was, he fell in love with that woman, and that's in his mind. And that's when he became, if you watch the movie, that's when he actually, his mind flipped and he became evil.
Oh.
They traumatized him.
Still a movie.
yeah. Well, we're gonna focus on the good stuff.
Yeah.
As the story goes, Imhotep was a priest and a healer, and he basically was the architect of this step pyramid. Djoser had a 20-year reign, and the pyramid builders assembled a 6-step layer stone pyramid to commemorate his death. This pyramid is surrounded by a complex of courtyards and temples, and if you go to Egypt, you can still see this to this day, right? So Imhotep. So who was Imhotep? And I know, we laugh and we have turned it into comedy where we call people Hoteps, because I do it all the time. But that's where this comes from, is because what happens with us as a people, we get stuff and we just run with it, and it's loosely based in fact and heavily based in emotion. And so when people get so far gone into Egyptian mythology where it makes them unrealistic, which is why I said we all was not kings and queens. No, everybody was not out here kings and queens. No, my king, no, my queen. There was people who built these pyramids, and I highly doubt that they were kings and queens. We were an advanced society. We had just as much difference within these societies as we do now, right? Because if we were all kings and queens, that to me, it cheapens who we were as a people, because it doesn't make us seem very advanced. It doesn't make us seem very comprehensive, and it's just unrealistic. We were not all kings and queens, and I get why we did that, is because we needed to reclaim what was taken from us, but we have to reclaim it in a way that is realistic. So Imhotep was actually a real person. He was considered to be the first architect, engineer, and physician in recorded history. He was also revered as a philosopher, and one of the few commoners to be acknowledged as divine after his death.
And he was a Nubian, right?
He was. He came from the Nubians. I think he probably considered himself Egyptian at that point,
Okay.
but he definitely was a black man. Yeah. The people in Egypt at this time were undeniably black. Imhotep stood out from the antiquity because his practices were unlike those of his era. And so, I'm not going to read this, but what happened with Imhotep is he was the doctor of the time. He was like the Pharaoh's doctor. Somebody had to build this pyramid, so they had a lot of broken bones, folks falling, heads, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of stuff that was going on around this time. He was the first person, because you seen it like on Prince of Egypt. Remember in Prince of Egypt, there was always something magical. They were like trying to conjure up magical spells in order to cure people. A lot of times that's true. A lot of times in Egyptian, back then, they relied on as much magic as they did science, right? Imhotep came, and he was the first one of history that they can record that took a practical approach to medicine. So in the Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus, and this is what kills me, it's called the Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus. Edwin Smith was some white dude who found his writings, and they named it after him. So they gave Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus. One of the most important documents describing medicine in the ancient Nile Valley has been attributed to Imhotep. The Edwin Smith Papyrus was written around 1700 BC, and it described wounds and how to treat them. The 17-page papyrus is unique among the remaining papyruses because of its rationale and scientific approach. Other medical texts of that time were based in magic. So he was talking about closing wounds with sutures, preventing and curing infection with honey, recommending to immobilize head wounds, body fractures. So he was like really taking a scientific approach. While many of the treatments now on the papyrus are pretty much outdated, but it's considered, his approaches set the bar for modern medicine as we know it, because without Imhotep, there wouldn't have been a Hippocrates. Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath person.
Yeah.
Hippocrates, is that who he is?
Mm-hmm.
The Hippocratic Oath. So without Imhotep, there wouldn't have been a Hippocrates, because those people went to Timbuktu to study. So Timbuktu was around this time, Timbuktu was here, and this is where a lot of people came to study, and Hippocrates, both whom studied in Egypt, would later acknowledge Imhotep's contribution to their understanding.
Wow.
So this is Imhotep. The first is the artist depiction. And if you watch Ancient Aliens, they trying to make our people aliens. They said y'all black folk can't do that. So literally, if you watch Ancient Aliens, there's a whole show that gives credence as to why these pyramids and this medical technology and stuff was built by aliens and not black people. It's called Ancient Aliens, and there's a whole study, because what happened is that the lion started telling history and you couldn't refute it, right? Because the hunter was telling history and it was all good. But now we got books on the internet we can research. The lion been telling history, and they like, oh man, now it must be aliens. Because we found out it was black folks and you can't refute that, and now it's like, no, it was aliens. So I know, so he looked a little alienish, but that's just an artist depiction. And that's how they drew him in like the hieroglyphics and everything. But these are statues, these are actual statues of Imhotep and his mother. Mama looked pure black. Imhotep, I don't know what he looked like, to be honest. However, I put this here because this could really look like him, even though it's an artist depiction. Absolutely 100% he could have looked exactly like this. This could have been him. You know what I mean? Because they are taking liberties, no doubt, and saying that this is what he looked like, because this is an artist depiction of Imhotep, but they took a lot of liberties with what Jesus looked like, so oh well. So I don't mind them taking liberties with, in those ways, because it is what it is. If they can take liberties with Jesus, we can take liberties with Imhotep. So,
I've seen that first one.
Oh, this one?
I had no idea that's what
Yeah.
it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And if they can make red, and if they can make orange, and if they can make whatever, they knew what they was making when they was making black. They knew, because they could have left him this color. They knew. So, yeah. So, next in line is Axum, and I'm pretty sure you probably heard that because I think that's even mentioned in the Bible some. Axum. Axum was a city in Africa, and it was from 100 to 940. So now Christ has been born, and we 100 to 940 years in. Axum was known for trade. These were their trade routes. So we was out here trading with folks something serious. Like, these were the trade routes of Axum. Oh, and what does this look like right in here, right? What does this remind you of? Egyptians. There's a reason why it reminds you of Egyptians, because if you look at where they're located right up in here. Axum, which makes sense that this will be the next kind of big place, civilization. And they established trade routes with Europe, Arabia, Persia, India, and China, Somalia. So we were very complex as a people. We established those trade routes, and it was a very wealthy country.
Wasn't there universities there?
In Axum? Maybe.
I mean yeah.
Timbuktu.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So they had a strong navy, and I mean, they were very, very rich.
That's what I was thinking of, that trade route. It wasn't like they was going down in miles. They was going thousands and thousands of miles.
Yeah, because you gotta think Africa has the most resources even to this day. So there were people in China, India, Persia, all these different places that was like, we want what you got, and they like, you gonna pay us. You know what I mean? So it was a very well established, they had a taxing structure, they had to tax people. So it was a very well established civilization. Ghana, the ancient Ghanaians were very powerful, just like the Axum. This is from 300 to 1100. These were their trade routes. If you look at Ghana, they were trading all across the continent. They became extremely wealthy because nothing went through the continent without Ghana. They controlled all of the trade routes in Ghana, and they controlled all of the gold. So Ghana became an extremely wealthy country. Oil. I'm not gonna go into the face markings, but oil, you ever see them? It was on Black Panther. Those face markings that they had, that's real. Those oil face markings, it was a very powerful Yoruba state, what is now in Benin, in Nigeria. A lot of us came from Nigeria. It was a large urban center, and the capital was surrounded by high walls. They produced a surplus of food, allowing dwellers to pursue craft and trade activities and sell their food. The Oyo Empire became the largest Yoruba state due to the skilled administration and organization of the Yoruba people. The empire was also renowned for their cavalry forces and being the only Yoruba state to adapt a mounted infantry. So they was on horses. So yes, so we had armies, we had navies. And if we had navies, that means we had boats. And I'm going to tell y'all something else, and I'm not going to go into it. There is a lot of study that went into, and I honestly 100% believe it, that we were in the Americas way before slavery. We had boats, and we traveled the ocean because they found pyramids right in South America. They found all kind of stuff that looks very African over here. And there's a book by Ivan Van Sertima, and it's called They Came Before Columbus. And it details all of the stuff that Africans have been over here trading and doing stuff way before Christopher Columbus. So how fascinating is that? That they think that, Christopher Columbus found America, meanwhile Africa's been over here trading. So, Mali. Oh, Mali. I'm going to skip because we're running out of time. So Mali was such a powerful country. So much gold in Mali. I'm going to skip the Mansa Musa because I know you guys have heard of Mansa Musa, but probably just never really dealt with it. So Mansa Musa means sultan or emperor. Mansa Musa became the ninth sultan of Mali from 1307 to 1332. Mansa Musa was so rich. Remember they said that Taylor Swift her concerts is like bringing money into the economy because when she comes, so much money going to the economy. So that happens. Like whenever LeBron James, when he was in Cleveland, when he left, Cleveland took a hit because all the restaurants took a hit. You know, one person can really have an effect over the economy. This man was so individually rich, he shifted the markets just by him giving out charity. He gave out so much gold in charity that it shifted the markets of the world at the time. So he was just out just because he was that rich of a person.
That's my cousin, you know.
That's your cousin? Mansa Musa Morgan.
So, Mansa Musa was Muslim, and we're going to get into that. Ooh. So Mansa Musa was Muslim, right? He went to Mecca, which is the holy pilgrimage in Islam. He went there in 1324, and he brought back a whole bunch of Arab scholars and governments and bureaucrats and architects, and he introduced like a lot of different building into Mali. So he was a very peaceful ruler, though. For him to be as rich, he was very peaceful, never had any wars. He was a very peaceful ruler, but he was extremely rich. The reason why I brought up that he was Muslim, is because we also, in our attempt to find out who we were as a people, I've heard it over and over again where we will dismiss Christianity in attempts to big up Islam as something that's more foundationally African, and that is 100% not true. Islam is as foreign to Africa as anything else. Islam is not, it is because I guess, but it's not. It's not an indigenous African religion, and even more so, the Arab slave trade was ridiculous. It was horrible, and it's going on right now. So we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and we talk about Europeans and how they oppressed us. The Arabs did a number on Africa. The Arab slave trade was absolutely horrendous, and it lasted for 1,300 years. To this day, they're still enslaving Africans. Arabs in Sudan are still enslaving Africans to this day. To this day. So, which is why, am I on my, this is why I have such a, I'm just gonna keep it real because y'all my people. This is why I have such an issue with corner stores. This is why I have such an issue with, because to me, you're bringing nothing into our community. Arabs have always been a merchant type of, a merchant class. They've always bought, that's why they buy and sell even to this day. That is their history, that is their culture. So that cultural tradition has kept up. And they're a merchant class even to this day. And this is not me talking about Arabs, this is me explaining our history. But to a degree, we overlook a lot of those shenanigans because we're not aware of the Arab slave trade and how horrific it was for our people. So I have a very touchy feeling towards corner stores when they don't do nothing but sell death, poison, cigarettes, lottery, because it's like you're bringing nothing of value into our community. And I know too much about my history for me to be okay with y'all doing that. Right. You know what I mean? Right. So I have a serious issue with that because I do know my history. And when I tell you the Arab slave trade was brutal, and they owe us as much as anybody else. Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, they got rich off the Saudi Arabia, and everybody running over to Dubai, taking pictures. Getting pictures in Dubai. All of these Arab countries owe us so much, right? So, the Arabs raided sub-Saharan Africa for 13 centuries without interruption. Most of the millions of men that they deported disappeared as a result of the inhumane treatment. This painful page in history of black people has apparently not been completely turned, and we just don't know about it. The Trans-Saharan caravan, which is the Trans-Saharan slave trade, not the transatlantic, it took Africans all up and down the interior and all out to the West Coast. They brought Africans from the interior and the West Coast and brought them up to like the Arab-speaking Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and that trip, because it was on foot, could take up to 3 months. We talk about the Middle Passage. That was pretty rough. They said that estimated 50% of all slaves on that route would die. Half of the people, because it was that rough. Slave trade, Arab slave trade continued. Male slaves would work as field workers or guards at their harems. And when we're talking harems, we're talking African women. African women were exploited. African women were taken as sex slaves. It just is what it is. To ensure that they never reproduced in case they got to be intimate with their fellow female slaves, men were castrated all the time. That was like a known thing for the Arab slave trade. You know how like lynching is associated with the slave trade here in America? Castration is associated with the slave trade in the Arab world. They castrated men all the time. That was their thing. Even as Europe, one of the key players, and we don't like Europe for their hands in the slave trade. Even as Europe, one of the key players in the African slave trade, abolished the practice hundreds of years ago, and the United States officially finally caught wind and abolished it too in 1865. Arab countries continued to trade, with the majority ending in the late 20th century. In Mali, slavery was officially criminalized only in 2007.
What?
Only 5 minutes, only in 2007. Like I said, there's issues with Arabs trading people right now. So I'm gonna skip ahead to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was a great place. Just looking at some art, these are some more artifacts that I'm pretty sure y'all have seen this, or you know what I mean? So now if you see that, you know it's like, oh, that came from Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was also very powerful. West African slave trade, I'm gonna go into that. So the West African, not the West African slave trade, the West African trade route. So West African nations right in here formed kind of like a small kind of like alliance, and they controlled all of this in here. So imagine the routes and the wealth that they built, which is why they were called the Gold Coast. They traded with the Dutch, the British, the French, the Scandinavians, all of them. And then we are at the African slave trade. So if you don't take anything from this presentation, I hope you understand how advanced our societies were. We were not we were not running around with spears. We were not running around, you know, just out here singing and dancing and praising. We had very advanced structures. We had there were wars, which is how we ended up getting put into slavery in the first place, which we'll talk about next week. You know, there were fights for control, and those fights for control ended up with, a lot of times, our people being sent into slavery, which is how we Africans had their hand in slavery. But as sordid as that history is, again, to me, that expresses the fact that we had real live societies, real strong societies with lots of money, lots of politics. I mean, so I think it does us justice to talk about it in a real way. So that is it for today. Next week we're gonna talk about resistance to slavery, because I don't wanna get into swing low, sweet chair. I don't wanna do that. I do wanna talk about how our ancestors fought, because that's what we did. Okay? So thank y'all.
Before you go, thank you so much. Let's give Leah a great big hand. Thank you all for watching, those who are watching online. We just want to thank her again. We'll be doing this all throughout the month of February. We're very grateful to have her expertise and to pack so much into 90 minutes, that's a lot in 90 minutes. Like somebody pass old girl some water. So, would anybody here, would anybody here invite somebody back next week to learn some more? Somebody commit to invite somebody back. We want to have more people. And I know it makes, I always say work, but it's good work to have people coming out to learn our culture. I want to answer one real quick question that nobody asked, but somebody probably will. And that is, why would you let somebody get up and teach about other religions and other gods in a Christian church? And the reason is, you really cannot know a culture unless you know what they believe. And when we talk about Black history and coming from Africa, we always gloss over the fact that there was a multiplicity of religions and gods and beliefs. As she said, Christianity and Islam were introduced to and through Africa in various ways. And then there were native gods and religions as well. As a Christian pastor, when I preach to you about the Israelites and Paul, I'm preaching to you all the time about the false gods and Baal and the Philistines and how they worship and what they believe, because it helped us to understand the cultures and the times and what the Israelites and the Christians and the Jews were dealing with. And so the same goes for us. We have a richer picture of who we are and where we come from, that we're not monolithic, that we are multicultural and multi-religious. And that's okay to respect each other who are black and from African descent, but have some different conviction or belief. Of course, I want everybody to be saved and go to heaven in the context and belief that I have. But I've learned to respect my brothers and sisters, regardless of what they believe, and I pray that they respect me too, as I hold my belief. And so I hope you understand that, and she did a phenomenal job of describing those gods and those religions. It would not promote, we don't want to put no pictures upstairs next to the cross and nothing like that. We are good and saved and sanctified and all that stuff. But we're knowledgeable and more aware of where we come from. Amen? We're knowledgeable and more aware of where we come from. So thank you so much. We're going to log off. We got brothers here ready to shut down, and so we can go home. We want to let them get home. Let's have a quick word of prayer and get out of here. Father, we thank you, and we are so grateful that our minds have been expanded and our hearts have been opened to our own history and our own heritage, to the stories of our own people. We may not know for sure exactly where each and every one of us may derive from, but we're grateful to get a picture of the richness of our collective history. Thank you for Sister Leah and her diligent study and research, and many others that have poured into her and our community, who are continuing to strive to teach us and younger generations so that we can teach those that come after us. Bless us as we leave this place, that you would continue to protect us and provide for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen and amen. There are lots of other Black History events going on this month. Please support them. You'll see stuff on our page, stuff on Facebook. Let's be sure to get out and support everything that supports our culture. God bless you. Get some food before you go. Get some pizza. Save the Pepsi for me.